Hi, I'm Hanson Hosein. I'm an educator and a keynote speaker, and I'm here to work with my friend and colleague Taylor Winters to present on this really compelling topic, especially for these times. And the subject is how to exercise thought leadership and sense making through a screen. This is something that I've been working on organically for a long time in terms of what it means to present both on stage and on camera, because it's something I've done as a television reporter, a professor, and a keynote presenter. But Taylor, in her work as an executive coach, has brought a lot more research and rigor in terms of what it means to truly do this effectively, especially now because we're living in this amazing time and challenging time of uncertainty and accelerated change. And so for us as leaders, I work a lot with technology companies, and Taylor has as well. We know that we have to lead and communicate effectively through screens, just as we are today. And so our intention today is to share some of our best practices around what it means to exercise thought leadership and sense making through a screen by explaining some of the methodologies that Taylor has and giving you the best tips that we have in terms of doing that. So Taylor, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself as well on this premise and this problem. I obviously came up with this title about thought leadership and sense making through a screen, and I do it on a regular basis. But what do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I think it's a great topic, Hanson. But I've been meditating on the idea of what is a thought leader. I think that that's helpful for us to define. And perhaps what comes to mind is someone who has a fully formed inspirational conclusion, a vision, and some idea of how to work toward that vision. And while I believe that that is hugely important, right, our current environment around the world, no matter where you are, is very much characterized by, I'll set this up by an acronym that you can think of as VUCA, so V-U-C-A, right? And so these elements of this environment that is really characterizing what we're all going through is volatility, uncertainty. Yep, V for volatility, U, uncertainty, and C for complexity, and A for ambiguity. So VUCA, it's a very easy forward acronym to remember. I would love to say that I had come up with it. I did not. It actually is a military concept, but I think it is hugely informative and accurate for what we are all experiencing, especially leaders. So with these characteristics and thinking about how does one be a thought leader, what struck me is I think what we need is thinking leaders, right? Not so much thought leadership, but thinking leadership at this moment.
Well, I really like this, and see, I'm already learning from you, Taylor, so I really appreciate this because I've always presented myself as a thought leader on stage and on camera, and this is what people and tech leaders come to me for their help in saying, how can we do this as well through our companies, especially tech companies? And so I really like this, especially given what you're saying around VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. I mean, this has only been accelerated and amplified, frankly, by both the global pandemic and global politics. So I'd like to dig a little deeper into this because I believe what we're going to talk about is in terms of what it means to present as a thinking leader to screen and using our whole intelligence as thinking leaders. So I'm wondering what you mean by thinking, by our whole intelligence. That's something I've learned from you when it comes to actually leading through screens.
Mm-hmm. All right. So to be a thinking leader then is to exercise, as you put it, the whole intelligence, or my whole intelligence, your whole intelligence. So then what is whole intelligence? And this too has three elements, right? So the first one I would say we are all most familiar with, which is IQ, right? Our intellectual quotient. And I don't necessarily mean this in the traditional sense of, you know, how high is your IQ? I'm thinking of this more as how do you reason? How do you think? I gestured to my head. How do you work through a problem, right? The second aspect, though, of your whole intelligence is less familiar, although has made its way into the popular mainstream of business from the world of psychology, and that's emotional intelligence. So we have IQ, and now we have EQ, emotional intelligence. And emotional intelligence may be safely characterized as our soft skills, right? But we'll talk a bit more about what emotional intelligence is and how it might be applied. But the third element of your whole intelligence is one that is pretty unfamiliar in the world of business, I would say. It is your body intelligence, right? So your physical self and how it is that you present in a physical space, hugely important over a screen. We'll walk through more why that is. But also the sensations and the energy, essentially, that someone on the outside can't see, but you certainly feel, right? So these three elements, your IQ, your EQ, and your BQ, being very aware of these elements and then being able to integrate them and ideally make them coherent, make them make sense together, right? We'll talk about making sense through a screen. And part of that making sense is you as an individual, as a thinking leader, making sense of those three aspects, your IQ, your EQ, your BQ.
So I love this because there are three aspects here. The intelligence and the emotional element, I obviously have something I've practiced and understood for a very long time in terms of the work I've done. But the one that really pushes me is this notion of BQ, this bodily intelligence. I'm looking forward to this. So as I think in terms about how I engage, and I think how you engage as well as a leader, and what people can learn from us over the next few minutes in terms of what we're talking about, how can we apply as thinking leaders our whole intelligence as leaders in a situation of VUCA, of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So I'm thinking about three iterations of where I am presenting and where you do as well. There's the one-on-one meeting consultation, there's the group conversation, and then there's the keynote presentation, like the TED Talk, right? And so now we're doing one-on-one right now, and maybe we can take those three elements and apply it to those three scenarios, and also think about what it means to even do all those things now that seem to be so commonplace to us as leaders through the challenge of the screens or remotely. So, Taylor, perhaps you can talk a bit first about this notion of IQ and the one-on-one consultation, which you do especially during your executive coaching consultations.
Okay, so we have this scenario that you and I are mimicking right now, a one-on-one meeting, right, through a screen. So one-on-one meetings can, on their own, be uncertain at times, complex at times, ambiguous, hopefully not too volatile. But a layer of technology, right, can certainly add some volatility. You don't have a good connection or otherwise. So what might you do to exercise your IQ in a way that can contribute to successful sense making? So if I were to give one piece of advice, it would be a technique that's called active listening. So I could talk about this for a long time, but we don't have that long. So I will just quickly attempt to describe it. The key word is to listen, right? The part, though, that makes it active, I will say, is characterized by being very focused on what you are taking in, the information that is being conveyed to you by by whomever it is that you're having this one-on-one dialogue with. And you may think, well, that's the point of a conversation, but I would challenge you to consider most of us at a certain point stop listening and we just start thinking about what it is we are going to respond with, right? So attempt to catch yourself as you are listening and you start having your thoughts, your IQ, your own reasoning kick in and you want to quickly reply. I challenge you to try something different, right? Active listening looks like me stating back to you, Hanson, my understanding of what it is I think I just heard you say, right? It's as though I was taking mental notes and then summarizing back to you that brief, right? And allowing you the space to say, yeah, you got that right, or not quite, let me clarify, right? But the magic words are, yeah, that sounds right. You've really won your next level in your conversation if that is the response that you get from whomever you're speaking to.
So if I think I've listened to you right, Taylor, what you're saying is that one way for us to demonstrate IQ as thinking leaders and using our whole intelligence, especially in a one-on-one through the screen consultation, is to engage in active listening, to reflect back on what we just heard from the person who just spoke, rather than saying, oh, I have to make sure that I get my knowledge and my credibility and my intelligence in this conversation as soon as possible, because it allows people to reflect a bit more and also make sure that the person who just spoke was adequately heard. Did I do well? That was very meta, right?
Yes, you got it right, Hanson. You heard me. And the counterintuitive part of that, you nailed it, is it's not about showing your IQ, showing your smarts. Really, the intelligence is making sure that you are gathering the data as accurately as it is being conveyed, right? And I'm sure as technology leaders, you are a fan of data, as am I. And you want to make sure that you have an accurate representation of that information before you respond to it, before you filter it through your own reasons and your own mental models.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense to me. So we've tackled IQ as the first element of being a thinking leader, using our whole intelligence in the one-on-one consultation through a screen. So let's move to the second scenario, which is really this idea of the group conversation. And this is something I have done for so many years, often behind closed doors, where people and leaders ask me to come to lead a small group conversation or a salon around really big ideas. And the idea is that they really want somebody to help not just present those ideas, but to moderate the conversation itself. So there's a rhythm and a pace, and everybody's heard accordingly. And what I found that I've enjoyed most about these things, especially in the internet age, is that they're in person, they're not recorded, there's no social media. And so it really leads to a very dynamic, open-ended conversation, which leaders, especially now, especially in VUCA, appreciate. Now, the challenge is, can we do that when we're having to use technology, we have to use a screen, we're not picking up the same cues. And so we want to apply the second element of our whole intelligence here, which is EQ, emotional intelligence. It's also something I do when I'm teaching as well. And often, I mean, without using your research and rigor, Taylor, when I'm using my EQ, or I think I'm using emotional intelligence, I'm trying to tune in to what I think is most motivating people to be in that room with me and to engage with me, and what is their greatest level of anxiety that I can resolve through some of the information I can help bring out through that conversation. So how well am I doing on EQ in a group conversation based on what you know? And what
Yeah, you're graduate level, Hanson. Yeah, you are. Well, to put it in context, EQ, as defined by Dr. Daniel Goleman, who didn't actually come up with the term, but is very much responsible for popularizing the term in the business world, or in psychology and then beyond in the business world. His theory says that emotional intelligence has 4 domains, right? And these domains, if you can think of them like a pyramid, so essentially you need to have base level before you graduate. So at the very base level, it's self-awareness, right? The ability to know what is going on in my subjective experience. And so it goes straight to IQ, EQ, BQ. I need to be able to identify where is my mindset, what are my thoughts, even perhaps how to clear my thoughts, what emotion am I feeling, and then how physically am I feeling an environment. What is the sensation? What's the energy, right? Am I tired? Am I really upbeat? Am I anxious? Am I overwhelmed? All of those aspects are so critical to self-awareness. The next level of EQ is self-regulation. So once I have all of that data, it's my ability to, say, manipulate it, right? And my ability to work with it to hopefully my advantage. Then the level beyond that, and the one that you were saying you are keen on practicing, is social awareness, right? So this idea of it's going to be really difficult for me to tune into what's happening with other people and their subjective experience if I'm very fuzzy and unfamiliar with my own. And it's kind of like an energetic wavelength, right? Like if it's really static on my end of things, it doesn't matter how clear someone else is coming through on their end. We're going to misfire. And then finally, beyond that, it's managing relationships. So essentially, there's this awareness and regulation component of myself and then with other people. So managing relationships is the ability to, I'm aware of what might be going on with you, but I also know how to manage that data and hopefully work with it to our best advantage. Okay.
That's great. So I appreciate the fact that I did hit sort of a graduate level EQ. And I think for me, especially if you're pinpointing EQ, one element of it is being energy. I have always seen any time that I'm on screen or on stage in terms of managing, being a conduit for that energy. Yes, there's a lot of ideas, a lot of words going past us, but I know that most people only pay attention to maybe half of that. And what I recognize really is that the energy in the room or on the screen is as important in terms of people being able to understand what is going on. And so there is a transference of energy happening, and I'm glad that it falls into the bucket of EQ. So I'd like to move on to BQ, unless there's anything else you'd like to say to that.
Well, I think that it would be helpful if we can spend just a moment on how would you practice EQ through a screen. Do we have time for that? Okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yes. And so you said something very important, which is people may not be listening to half of what's being said. It's even more than that, right? So less than 10% of meaning has been proven to be communicated through words, meaning you stop listening to what I'm saying, but you're going to take still a lot away from this conversation. So how do you do that in a group setting? And then how do you do that in a group setting over a screen? Very difficult. Again, I'll give one piece of advice. So related to emotional intelligence and practicing that. So the piece of advice is to listen for the emotion, right? And listen specifically for negative emotion, right? And negative emotion will often show up more than positive emotion. That's just how it works with our neurochemistry or negativity bias. It's not even necessarily cultural. It is human nature. So listen for negative emotion, and it usually shows up as resistance, right? You'll find it in defensiveness, in criticism, maybe to a more severe extent, contempt, or stonewalling, people just not wanting to talk. When you notice that, remember this: name it to tame it, right? And it sounds very kiddish and cartoonish. That's so that you can remember it. But really, how you do that is to say, I am sensing or I am feeling frustration, right? You don't have to single anyone out, because you're in a group setting. You just pause and you say, I am sensing, I am feeling, and name the emotion. And believe it or not, I could back this up with a whole bunch of neuroscience. It will start to allow the physiological effects of stress to process. I promise you.
I think that's really great advice. Yeah. And I am sensing that you know more about this than I do. This is great.
I geek out on the science.
Let's move on to BQ, the final scenario, and which is one of my favorites, and the thing that people want most from me, which is to get up on that stage or get up on that screen and give that big, highfalutin presentation or a TED Talk. And that has so much currency in the world that so many people who are watching this, that they occupy. And the challenge right now is that we have to do it through a screen. And so this is where we're going to apply the notion of BQ, bodily intelligence, and the thing that we probably are most uncomfortable with. I remember when I was training as a journalist for television, having a coach show me that I actually had to use my hands when I was speaking. That just felt very awkward, and I had no idea how that had anything to do with what I was trying to say to camera. But now you see me using my hands vociferously, so it must mean something. And also, I've done a lot of training over the last few months with some companies that are looking to get all their employees on camera because they can't meet in person. And so they want to do eye contact to the camera. They want to focus on what they're wearing. Hand motions are important. This whole idea of transfer to energy. And so, but it does require a certain level of physical performance. Mm-hmm. How do we get people what takeaway can we give to people when it comes to bodily intelligence, especially in the context of that big presentation?
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad you asked, and really lovely that you shared the anecdote of feeling once uncomfortable getting the feedback that, hey, you might need to start using your hands in order for us to help make some sense of what it is that you are saying, right? And you were doing so as a journalist. over a screen, I presume, right? Being broadcast into people's homes. So whether the coach knew it or not, the feedback that that individual is giving you is your body language isn't matching up with the words that you're saying, right? So I mentioned this statistic with emotional intelligence, and it's so important that I will clarify it again, but less than 10% of meaning has been shown to be communicated through words, which is mind-boggling, right? But let's think of the Olympics of keynote speeches, which is TED Talks, right? You've given a TED Talk. I have not. So you've been to the Olympics. I haven't, right? But I've coached some Olympians, including yourself, TED Talk Olympians, and I certainly can't remember, and I would wager to bet that there are no TED Talks where somebody is like this, right? And talking to you and telling you so much that is inspirational and all of these facts while they are awkwardly standing there, maybe even worse, right? Looking around, down and around, not making eye contact with our audience, and to a greater extent, right, using their physical space and using the energy that is around them to get people excited, to get people motivated, to get people to believe, right? And I just added all of that emphasis into my communication to you so that you might lean in, right? And hopefully that's the experience that those of you who are tuning in have as well. You can practice this. How do you do that through a screen, right? Well, you can absolutely just start using your hands to talk, but as Hanson mentioned, it might feel a little awkward. So perhaps offline, when you're not on a screen, one way to start to really get in tune with this body intelligence, to start connect to it, is to do very simple things that may feel a bit awkward to you. But again, you don't have to do this in front of anybody else, but try dancing. You do not have to be a good dancer, right? But there is a special connection with movement that we get when we dance. Try singing, right? Try using different variations of your voice. You do not have to be a good singer either. That's the beauty of it. But try using your voice, right? Another exercise that I like to encourage the leaders that I coach to do is very simple breathing exercises, right? And you can find a wealth of them on the internet. And I wouldn't really worry about going wrong. Start anywhere on your journey with breath work, but it's something that is very unconscious to us, right? But as part of your body intelligence, it's bringing it into consciousness and being very aware of. It's going to make a big difference if you're in a presentation and your breath is very rapid and short, right? Which happens when your heart rate goes up, and your heart rate goes up when you're nervous. So all of these things are very important to pay attention to. Try dancing, try singing, try breathing.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because as much as we have a multicultural audience obviously watching this, and some things may be more comfortable or less comfortable depending on where they come from, but there's a certain universality to the things that you're saying, because we all have to visually communicate through the screens. And I have found that what really does get people to pay most attention to me, whether I'm on camera or in person, is whether they can feel my presence. And presence is so powerful if we are in control of our own emotions and our own physicality. And to me, that starts with breathing. If we are in a straight state of anxiety and stress, it'll be conveyed to the people who are watching us, and they won't be able to take in as much as we're trying to convey to them, because they're focusing too much on what seems to be the problem as opposed to what we seem to be trying to offer as a solution.
Yes, beautifully put.
So, well, this is great. So I think we've done a really good job of sort of understanding how we can apply our whole intelligence to how we engage, or I can engage as a thinking leader in a time of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And as we promised, and remember the subject of this particular session is how to exercise thought leadership and sense making through a screen. I want to focus our last few minutes on this notion of sense making. We are now thinking leaders. We are applying our whole intelligence, whether it's one-on-one, in a group, or in a keynote presentation. But this notion of sense making is more important now than ever, especially during this time of VUCA. I mean, as an educator and as somebody who's led a graduate program on communication during the whole rise of digital media, some of the anxiety that comes into all of this is that we are surrounded by too much information, too many choices in terms of media. And so it puts us in a state of anxiety because of the chaos out there. And so to me, sense making, I've always interpreted as my role as a sense maker as being some of that filter who can provide perspective and make useful some of that information to the people that I'm addressing through the screen or on stage. And so to me, sense making is absolutely important. I've done it primarily through the vehicle of storytelling, and that's what my graduate program is about. So I am looking to be that information filter as a sense maker. How do you interpret sense making when you're engaging with your executive clients, Taylor?
Yeah, great question. And I'll let you all in on a behind the curtain, so to speak, of coaching. And that is that I as a coach never know where I'm going to go with a coachee, right? I don't have some predetermined script, say even a meeting agenda to work with, right? I don't know necessarily what information is going to be conveyed to me by my coachee. And oftentimes I coach people who are far beyond my subject matter expertise in completely different industries than I am, but I can still be very successful at sense making with them. And that is such a powerful tool, right? And I really believe it's not as difficult as we make it out to be. Right, so we've given you some of these basics with IQ, EQ, BQ, so that you showing up to any engagement can be present, as Hanson said, present with your IQ, EQ, BQ, and at the ready to receive information. And in this time of VUCA, that information is likely to fall into all of those categories: volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. So what do you do with it to make sense, to move forward? Okay, so I'm a big fan of this framework that you can use in the course of a 30-minute meeting, an hour meeting, but it works well with a closed set of time. And it's another acronym, and it's T-GROW. So the letter T and then the word grow. So T stands for topics, right? Initially begin by, instead of being rigid and fixed and saying, we're going to talk about this one topic, as meetings often go, right? I'm telling you in a coaching session, that's just not how it goes. And I'm sure everyone can relate to the experience that even a very structured meeting can veer off course, right? But let that happen a bit, right? If you can think of a T, it kind of expands and then it gets very focused, right? So if you were to think of T-GROW as a visual, think of it like visually a T, and the American alphabet anyway. And then that grow piece is going deeper, right? So once you've explored some topics, focus in on a goal, right? This is really what we want to work toward. Sometimes there are T topics plural, sometimes there are goals topics plural, but try for one.
And goal is G, by the way, so G for goal.
Goal is G, yes, yeah. Thank you. Goal is G. Then the R, so we have TGR. R is reality. It's probably my favorite, right? Because goals can tend to be very lofty. And I am not suggesting that you don't get big with your visions, but when your boots on the ground, let's say, right, VUCA, like we need to move forward, we need to advance toward our aim. Reality is really important. Assess what is going on. Assess what is actually reasonable and realistic, right? This is where your EQ can be very helpful too, recognizing resistance and emotion that comes up around reality, because sometimes it can be a little scary, okay? So then we have O. So O is for opportunity. What are the opportunities now that we've assessed reality? What are the opportunities available to us, right? How might we actually advance toward our goal? So you might think of O, opportunities, as possible solutions, right? And then W is wrap up. right? Make sure that you have, right? Wrap up, right? W, wrap up. Make sure that you have a clear conclusion. As a coach, I'm pretty hard on this, right? Meaning I send people away with, you tell me, you can, as a journalist, you'll appreciate this, but the who, where, what, when, why, right? I need to know all of those details from you because you need to know all of those details in order to execute, in order to make it happen. So that's a successful wrap up, not just here's what we talked about, everybody goes on their way. No, how are we putting this plan into action? Very important.
So let me take these final seconds after that amazing set of insights to wrap up between us, Taylor. We have attempted to give you some advice around how you can exercise thought leadership, but now we're calling it be a thinking leader and sense making through a screen. And we're suggesting you use your whole intelligence, use your IQ, and in our situation, active listening, EQ, and in this situation, name it and then tame it, as you said, and BQ, our physicality, recognizing that the screen is requiring us to be very visual. And so that can involve some dancing and some breathing, but at least understand that we have to convey information, not just through our words, but through our body. And ultimately trying to make sense of all this through this acronym TGROW, which is topics, goal, reality, opportunity, and wrap up, which is what we want to do right now. So I think this is really great. We hope this has been really informative and useful to you. We are in an unprecedented, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous situation, but there's also amazing opportunity for us to lead as thinkers and think as leaders differently through this screen. So Taylor, with that, I'd like to give you the final word as we say goodbye.
No. My goodness. Well, I think you summarized all of that beautifully. I hope it's very useful to everyone. And I will say what I'm a big fan of is practicality, right? Something that people can actually put into practice. And I promise you that I've tried all of this myself on now a daily basis, but don't be afraid to just take one part of it, break it down. But as part of going out into the world and making use of this, we wish you the best. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.